Schoolgirl took a beggar to her ex's wedding. She had no idea he was a millionaire CEO. Some mistakes don't feel like accidents. They feel like fate, like bringing a stranger to your ex's wedding just to prove you're okay. Like borrowing a smile from a man with no past and watching it slowly become real. He didn't know he used to own the world. He didn't know he'd become his reason to return to eat. But in a garden lit by regret and soft music, they found something neither expected. A second chance, quiet doughities undeniable, and entirely theirs. But Luchia Mendoza opened the mailbox the way you'd open a wound, slowly bracing for something you couldn't undo. Lately it was always bills, or supermarket coupons. But that day there was something different, something smooth and heavy, wrapped in cream paper with a gold seal. It smelled faintly of roses and regret. She didn't need to open it to know what it was, but she did anyway. Adrian and Rebecca invite Luchia Mendoza to celebrate their union. The words struck like a slap, printed in cursive too pretty to hurt that much. Her name was there, on the same line as his. She sat on the curb outside her building, as if her knees had suddenly forgotten how to work. Adrian, the man who once made her laugh through ramen nights and whispered dreams. The man who 3 months ago said, "I just need space to figure myself out." The man who swore Rebecca was just a co-worker. Now he was marrying her. At Bula Vista Hall, no less. The same venue Lucia had secretly circled in bridal magazines when she thought dreams were still hers to keep. She clenched the invitation, then let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. No, she wouldn't cry. Not over a man who didn't even pay to replace the Wi-Fi router when he left. She walked back upstairs, her boots clicking against the cracked hallway tile, tossed the invitation on the counter like it had personally insulted her, then stood in her kitchen, staring at the microwave clock blinking 12, because even time refused to cooperate. She muttered aloud, "But I'm not going alone." He had no boyfriend, no brothers, no handsome best friend waiting in the wings with a well-timed confession. But pride would fight, even if he was a stranger. That night, fueled by boxed wine and a romantic comedy that made her hate everything even more, Luchia scrawled a plan on a napkin. You can fake love for 3 hours. But if he makes Adrian uncomfortable. By morning she realized how ridiculous it all sounded. But that didn't stop her from slipping on her coat and heading outside. She needed air. She needed anything that wasn't that living room, that memory, that laugh that still echoed in the cracks of her apartment walls. He walked past a bakery, past a bookstore, past a restaurant she used to love. A man sitting on the ground beside a marble column. No sign, no cup, just a backpack at his side and eyes that didn't beg. They watched the world like someone who had already lost too much to be surprised by anything. His beard was overgrown, his hair messy, but something about him felt still, like the calm in the middle of a storm, not defeated, just detached, untouched by the noise. Luchia stood up. He looked up slowly, his gaze level, blue eyes unflinching. "You okay?" she asked. He shrugged. "Depends what you call..." His voice was deep, unbothered, the kind of voice that didn't need to prove anything. "You don't look like you're from around here," she said. "Used to be. Gotta know." He hesitated, then smiled like someone about to lie with good intentions. She nodded. "I need a date for a wedding. I can't pay, but I can promise a shower, a clean bed, and a reason to eat." "That's your pitch." He studied her, one eyebrow raised. "You always pick strangers off the sidewalk. Only the ones who look like they've got nothing left to lose." There was a beat of silence. Then, impossibly, he laughed. And it wasn't bitter. It was full. Surprise. "All right then," he said. "Let's ruin a wedding." Luchia didn't know that in saying yes, she had just opened the door to the most important mistake of her life. Because he wasn't who she thought he was. And neither, maybe, was she. Chapter 1. The social revenge. The heater rattled like it had a cough. and the only light in the room came from a cheap lamp she'd taped back together 3 times. Luchia stood by the door, watching the stranger she'd just invited into her life peel off a threadbare jacket and line his shoes by the mat. He didn't ask questions. Didn't marvel at the walls covered in sticky notes and bills. He didn't comment on the cracked window above the sink. He just said, "Got any coffee?" Luchia blinked. "You? Move fast." "You run on caffeine," he replied, setting his backpack on the floor like it belonged there. There was a moment of silence. Luchia moved to the kitchen, filling a pot with water that took forever to boil. Dylan wandered around the living room, eyes scanning without touching. He stopped in front of a framed photo, Lucia and Adrienne, holding funnel cake at a street fair. The kind of memory that now made her skin crawl. "But him?" Dylan asked. He turned. "Yeah. He looks boring." He was, but he was consistent, until he wasn't. Dylan didn't press. He just sank into her second-hand couch, letting out a sigh like he hadn't sat down in weeks. The kettle whistled. She poured the instant coffee into mismatched mugs. His had a chip in the rim. She handed it to him anyway. They sat across from each other, her cross-legged on a footstool, him sunken deep into the cushions like he'd always belonged there. "So," Lucia began, clearing her throat, "the deal." He raised an eyebrow. "The wedding's Saturday. It's at Bella Vista Hall. You're my date. No funny business, no real kissing unless it looks natural. Your job is to make Adrienne uncomfortable and to act like you can't stop looking at me." "Your performance art?" he asked, lips twitching. "More like emotional landscape. You want me to play the perfect boyfriend, to get revenge on your ex?" "Exactly." He leaned forward. The air between them shifted, just slightly. "And why me?" he asked. Luchia hesitated. That part she wasn't ready to say aloud. That he'd looked. Instead, she answered, "You're tall. You've got the kind of face that makes people curious, and I have 0 other options." He sipped the coffee. "Okay, what's in it for me?" "A shower, a clean shirt, a hot meal, and the satisfaction of annoying." He tilted his head, considering. "And what do you want them to think?" Lucia reached into the drawer beside her and pulled out a scribbled napkin. "You're an international sustainability consultant. You met me at a non-profit event about urban reforestation. You complimented my volunteer work with rescued animals. I rolled my eyes. You fell in love." Dylan chuckled. "You've rehearsed this." "I watched 4 seasons of Grey's Anatomy and 1 Hallmark movie. I know how fake love works." He leaned back, one arm over the back of the couch. "And I'm guessing there are rules." Luchia pulled a notebook from her bag. "Rule 1. No improvising. Stick to the story." "Got the." "Rule 2. Stay with me until the end of the reception. Don't disappear." "Rule 3. She looked up. No asking about my past." He smiled softly. "You got it backwards. That one's my rule." Her breath caught for half a second. Dylan stood and extended his hand like a gentleman in an old black and white movie. "Miss Mendoza, I accept your ridiculous offer." He hesitated, then took his hand. It was warm, firm, unshaken. "You're not nervous," she whispered. "You are," he replied. She looked up at him, unsure whether to laugh or run. "You sure you can pull this off?" she asked. "I've been pretending for a long time." He said it so quietly she almost missed it. That night, Dylan fell asleep on the couch with one of her blankets, the kind you get free with a mattress. Lucia lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling. Outside, the streetlight buzzed. Somewhere below, a dog barked twice and fell silent. And all she could think was, he didn't ask for anything. He didn't take anything. He just came in like he already knew how to be part of her life. She rolled over. Saturday was coming fast, and something told her it wouldn't go the way she planned. I chopped to the makeover. The sun found its way through the dusty blinds like it had to negotiate for space. It landed on the edges of the couch, on the curve of Dylan's shoulder, on the faded collar of his borrowed t-shirt. Luchia stood in the kitchen doorway holding 2 chipped mugs. You want sugar? She asked. He stirred from sleep like someone used to being watched. Just coffee. As he figure, she muttered, handing him the mug. You seem like the type who seemed too much to sweeten anything. He took it with a quiet smile. And you seem like the type who uses sarcasm to avoid real emotions. Luchia blinked. Wow, you woke up observant. You never stopped being. They drank in silence, leaning against opposite walls. The tension wasn't loud, it wasn't romantic or dangerous. It just hovered in the air like something waiting to be named. Finally, she pointed to the bathroom door. Time to look like someone who charges $800, 0 cents an hour to save trees. Dylan raised an eyebrow. You're giving me a makeover? And giving me a chance not to be the girl who shows up with a man who smells like streetlight dust and broken promises. He smirked. In the bathroom, Luchia tied her hair into a knot, opened the case of supplies she'd borrowed from her cousin, a part-time hairdresser, and stood behind him like a sculptor preparing to chisel marble. He sat on the stool, cowl around his shoulders, legs planted wide like he had no intention of flinching. He turned on the clippers. If you flinch, I swear I'll give you a middle school buzz cut. I trust you. The words slipped out too easily. Luchia paused. What? Because if you were going to hurt me, you would have done it last night. 80%. Instead, she ran the clippers along the back of his neck. His hair fell in quiet tufts to the tile floor. So she asked, where'd you learn to talk like a therapist? Boardroom, he said. You want people to stop asking questions? You ask better ones first. He frowned. That sounds practiced. Everything about me is. For the first time she saw it. The stillness wasn't just calm, it was armor. The way he sat straight, hands resting loosely but purposefully. The way he avoided mirrors, as if he didn't trust the reflection. You were somebody, weren't you? I still am. He rinsed his face, lathered shaving cream over the sharp angles of his jaw. Her hands hovered near his throat. Careful, precise. If I cut you here, she joked, I could probably plead insanity, temporary emotional damage. He closed his eyes. Wouldn't be the worst thing someone's done to me. He went stern. It wasn't a joke. When she finished, he looked different. Still Dylan, but sharper, defined, like the truth had been hiding under stubble and shadows this whole time. Luchia handed him a shirt quite fitted, something from her ex's drawer that she never had the nerve to throw out. He tried the... Dylan disappeared into the bedroom, then stepped out, buttoned the last clasp. Lucia's breath caught. He looked like he belonged on a magazine cover. Worse, he looked like he had a past too complicated to be captured in a photo. He blinked fast. Okay, you'll do. Just do, he asked, adjusting the cuffs. I was aiming for unforgettable. That's not on the checklist, she said, turning away too fast. But her heart had already started to argue. They spent the rest of the day rehearsing. He memorized the made-up story. Environmental consultant, reforestation event, love at first eye. She added dramatic flourishes, how he rescued her cat, how he kissed her hand under moonlight by a compost bin. But Dylan kept asking the wrong questions. What's the real reason you want to go to this wedding? What's the real reason you picked me? What does it matter if he sees you with someone else? Luchia shut him down every time. Because sometimes, the only way to move forward is to be seen moving on. Because you're tall. Because he didn't believe I'd ever be worth coming back for. He didn't realize she was crying until she saw the reflection in the microwave door. Dylan sat across the table, hands folded, quiet. You don't have to prove anything to them, he said softly. You're already enough. Luchia turned her head. You don't know me. No, he agreed, but I see you. That night she fell asleep on the couch while he watched a documentary about birds. He didn't comment when her head dropped against his shoulder. And she didn't flinch when he reached over and pulled the blanket over both of them. Just two people, pretending not to fall. Chapter 3, The Wedding Entrance. Luchia stood in front of the tall mirror, breathing like she was learning how all over again. The emerald green dress clung to places she hadn't expected. and the heels borrowed from her cousin felt like they were testing her commitment to the lie. He didn't feel powerful. Not yet. He felt like a girl pretending to be a woman who had already healed. But when Dylan stepped out of the bathroom, adjusting the cuffs of his navy droopy shirt, something shifted. "You clean up okay?" she murmured. "You don't," he replied, slow smile forming. "You look dangerous." Lucia blinked. Dangerous? Like someone I shouldn't follow into a room but probably would. She looked away, her voice smaller than she intended. "Don't say things like that, it sounds too real." "What if it is?" We did. The taxi ride to Bella Vista was quiet. Lucia watched the buildings roll by in a blur of lights and shadows while Dylan sat beside her like a man on his way to trial, calm but watchful. When the car stopped, Lucia didn't move right away. Her hand hovered over the door handle. "This is crazy," she whispered. "We shouldn't be here." Dylan gently took her hand. Warm, steady. "You've already survived the worst of him. This is just the encore." She looked at him, and in that moment she didn't see a stranger. He saw someone who hadn't asked for anything, yet had stayed anyway. He nodded once, "Okay." They stood out. Bella Vista Hall was glowing, chandeliers like upside-down sunsets, white curtains swaying in the open doors, laughter bubbling from champagne glasses. It looked exactly like the wedding Lucia used to dream about, before she knew dreams could betray you. Every head turned as they walked in. Dylan didn't flinch. He walked like the room was his. Not urged, just certain. Lucia's heart raced in her chest, not from nerves, from something deeper. He caught glimpses, whispered names, raised brows, a few stunned ex-classmates. And then she heard him. "Lucia?" She turned. Adrian stood in a black tailored suit, expression blank but cracking at the edges. His hand clutched a champagne flute too tightly. "Who didn't expect to see you," he said, voice low. Lucia smiled without warmth. The invitation said +1. I never miss a good performance. Dylan stepped forward, offering a hand. Dylan, Adrian hesitated for a second too long before shaking it. "A purper-like boyfriend?" Dylan looked at Lucia, then back at Adrienne. "Something like that." Lucia leaned in, voice sweet with frost. "He's an environmental consultant, urban reforestation, passionate about saving things most people throw away." Adrienne blinked. "Interesting," he said, lips pressed. "Rebecca will love meeting you. She always admired Lucia." Admired or envied, Lucia thought, but she just smiled. They were seated near the dance floor. Lucia's heart pounded as she glanced at the glittering tables, the carefully curated flower arrangements, the guests with opinions. Dylan, however, looked perfectly in place. He held the silverware like he'd done it 100 times. He complimented the roasted beets with such sincerity that the waiter blushed. At one point, he even struck up a conversation with two older men about ethical investing and green startup accelerators. Lucia leaned over, whispering, "Where did you learn to talk like that?" "YouTube," he said without missing a beat. We stared at him. He didn't smile. Maybe he was joking, maybe not. And then she arrived. Rebecca, descending the staircase like a debutante from a wedding magazine. White satin, beaded bodice, a smile as sharp as her cheekbones. The room clapped. Cameras flashed. Lucia sipped her drink and pretended her stomach wasn't folding in on itself. Rebecca made her rounds like a hostess at a gala. And eventually she landed at their table. "Lucia," she said, stretching each syllable like taffy. "I'm so glad you came." Lucia smiled, calculating but calm. Wouldn't miss it. Rebecca turned to Dylan. "And who is this Greek god?" Lucia's eyes narrowed. "This is Dylan, my boyfriend." Rebecca extended her hand. "Where are you from, Dylan?" Dylan didn't blink. "Norway," he said smoothly. "Grew up here, though. My father was a diplomat." Lucia nearly choked on her wine. Rebecca tilted her. Dylan nodded. I prefer a quieter life now. She dragged me here." He gestured to Lucia, his smile quiet but real. Rebecca blinked. "Charming," she said, then floated away, but not before tossing a look over her shoulder that said everything her smile didn't. Lucia, he leaned toward Dylan. "Did you just make up a whole international backstory?" "You said I couldn't improvise," he replied, "but I assumed exceptions were made for Rebecca." Lucia burst out laughing, hiding it behind her napkin. And in that moment she wasn't thinking about Adrienne, or the betrayal, or the sadness she'd buried. She was just grateful for the way Dylan made her forget. Even just for a second. The music shifted to something slow. The couples moved to the floor. Dylan extended his hand. Lucia hesitated. "Going out is always a bad idea. But you've never looked more like a woman who deserves a first dance." He took his hand, and under the chandelier they moved. Not perfectly, not romantically, but like they were learning how to breathe around each other. And as he pulled her just slightly closer, she whispered, "You're not who you say you are." He couldn't deny, "Neither are you." And somewhere in the corner of the room, a woman in a dark green dress watched them dance. Then pulled out her phone and sent a message. "Found him. Babaton was a formidable fortune." The garden truth. The garden was quieter than the ballroom, lit only by strands of soft lights, and the fading pulse of a wedding playlist echoing through glass doors. White roses curled up against the chill, and somewhere near the hedge a fountain gurgled like it was trying not to interrupt. Lucia leaned on the railing near the edge of the patio, her back to the music. She needed air, needed stillness. The evening had gone better than she ever dared imagine, and yet, something felt off. She wasn't used to things going well, not without consequence. Footsteps behind her, slow, purposeful. "You okay?" he asked, voice lower than usual. "You're not going to believe this," she said, "but I think I actually enjoyed myself." "That's the most dangerous part," he said softly, "when you forget it's all pretend." She looked at him, but he wasn't "What's wrong?" Before he could answer, a voice cut through the night air. "I know you." Lucia turned. A woman stood at the edge of the garden path, high heels sinking slightly into the grass, dark blazer, hair pulled tight, eyes sharp. Not guessed, not with that posture. Dylan didn't flinch. "I think you've got the wrong person," he said, his voice returning to its usual calm. The woman took a step forward. "No, I don't. Navaro Tech. You were on the cover of Forbes 3 years ago. Scruffy beard, wrinkled shirt. Your eyes haven't changed." Lucia. "Navaro what?" The woman turned to her, tone colder now. "You really don't know who he is?" Lucia looked at Dylan. He didn't deny it. He didn't move. He didn't even blink. "Dylan," she asked, her voice cracking. "I think this conversation is over," he said to the woman. She smirked. "Don't worry. I'm not here to arrest you, just here to remind you that not everyone forgets a billionaire who vanishes after a scandal." Then, as quickly as she arrived, the woman turned and walked back toward the hall, heels clicking like punctuation marks. The silence that followed was louder than anything Lucia had ever heard. She turned to him. "Tommy, that wasn't real. It's complicated. He took a breath. For the first time, his calm wavered. "My name is Dylan Navaro. I used to be CEO of Navaro Tech for 6 months. Then the board pushed me out over a scandal that wasn't mine. My face was everywhere. The lawsuits were louder than the truth. So I disappeared." Lucia's throat tightened. "And this whole thing, this act, it was just some break from hiding?" "No," he said quickly. "You weren't part of the plan. But you went along with it. Let me parade you in front of my ex. Let me make up fantasies while your real life was a headline." "Lucia, I didn't mean for it to go this far." "Then, why didn't he stop it?" He did, because the answer was obvious. Because maybe part of him needed to be someone else for a while. He took a step back. The garden suddenly felt colder, farther from safety. "I asked you one thing," she whispered, One rule: no secrets. I told you not to ask about my past. You didn't say I was building a fantasy with someone who used to own half the city. He looked at her, the calm cracking at the edges. I wasn't hiding from you, Lucia. I was hiding from the world, from a name that stopped feeling like mine. And then you walked into it, and it felt like breathing again. Her voice was shaking. Now you lied to me. He was... He reached for her hand. She pulled away. I need space. To do what? To figure out if anything about this was ever real. Dylan stepped back, nodding slowly. He understood. Luchia walked away past the roses, past the lights, past the version of herself she thought she'd become. And somewhere behind her, the man with no name was left standing under a chandelier of stars, finally seen. And finally Alok. Chapter 5. The Internet finds him. The apartment was too quiet. Lucia sat at the edge of her bed, still in her dress, makeup smudged, hair pinned and falling. She hadn't changed. She hadn't cried either. She was stuck in that middle space, between heartbreak and numbness. The coffee pot gurgled in the kitchen, the only sound in a world that had turned sideways overnight. She stared at the phone in her hands. It buzzed. Once. And then it didn't stop. He blinked at the screen. Is that your new man? Wait, is this real? OMG, Lucia and the missing CEO? He opened one message, then another. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled. Then she saw it. Former Navaro Tech CEO, scotted at Bella Vista wedding. Her heart plummeted. There it was, a blurry photo of them on the dance floor. Her laughing, him looking at her. Underneath it, Luchia Mendoza, reportedly dating fugitive billionaire Dylan Navaro. No. He threw the phone onto the couch, but it was too late. The noise had already found her. The comments were worse. People who didn't know her, people from high school, people she'd forgotten existed. Some cheering, some accusing, some dissucking her dress like it meant something, and some calling her a manipulator, a gold digger, an accessory to something she didn't even understand. They think I helped you hide, she whispered to no one. Because Dylan wasn't there. Diapha down, the knock on the door came. 3 short taps. Lucia didn't move at first, but something in her chest. He opened the door slowly. He was standing there in a black hoodie, eyes dark under the weight of the headlines. He held an envelope in his hand. What's that? She asked, voice flat. Everything, he said. My real name, my ID, a letter. I wanted you to have the truth, even if it's late. Luchia took it but didn't open it. You said you wouldn't come back. I know, he said, but I had to say thank you. He stared at him. For reminding me I was more than what happened, for laughing with me, for letting me be a version of myself I didn't hate. He didn't respond. Are you okay? He asked softly. No, she said honestly. I'll go then. He turned. Wait, she said, the word catching in her throat. He paused. Are they going to come for you? Maybe, but they won't find me here. I won't let them touch you. He closed the door after him, slid, and for the first time in 2 days, she opened the letter. Dylan's handwriting was steady, slanted. Luchia. I don't know what to call what we had. I just know it was real for me. The laughing, the couch, the lie that started feeling like something better than truth. I'd disappeared because I lost faith in people, and you brought it back without meaning to. If you ever wonder if I used you, I didn't. I would have told you everything eventually, but I was scared of losing the only good thing I'd stumbled into. I'm sorry I let the world find us before I told you who I really was. If you still see something in me, even just a little, I'll be waiting. North Avenue Bridge, the place I always talked about but never showed you, the only place I've ever felt quiet. No pressure, no answers, just me. Luchia sat down at the table. He held the paper in both hands, but it felt like it was holding her. By nightfall she found herself walking. Not consciously. not with intent. But her feet knew. The bridge was empty. Wind blew off the river in slow, cold sighs, and there he was, sitting on the leg like he belonged to the horizon. "You came," he said. "I haven't forgiven you," she replied. "Fair enough. But I want to understand." He turned slowly. Their eyes met in the orange glow of the street lamp. "That's enough," he said quietly. Luchia stood beside him. Two people who had built a lie together and accidentally fallen into the truth. Chapter 6. The Cultural Contract. Aunt Rosa's house smelled like thyme and fresh bread, and second chances. It was the kind of place where clocks didn't tick loud and windows never stayed closed for long. Luchia hadn't been there in years, not since her mom stopped calling and her father stopped trying. Now she returned not as a visitor, but as someone who had no other place left to exhale. Dylan came with her. No questions, no expectations. Just that quiet steadiness that followed him like a shadow he no longer feared. Aunt Rosa opened the door in bathrobe and flip-flops. "Well, well," she said, arms crossed. "You brought a man, and he doesn't look like disappointment." "You get excited," Luchia replied. "Too late. I'm already planning your wedding playlist." They stayed in the spare room. One twin bed, one cot, one battered bookshelf that smelled like dust and poetry. Dylan took the cot without hesitation. He fixed the garden gate, repaired the porch swing, made Luchia coffee before she asked. Every day they grew quieter together. Every day they let their silences become safe again. They started working in the community garden down the road, a patch of dirt overrun by weeds and forgotten promises. Luchia painted signs, Dylan hauled bricks. The neighbors stared at first, but then they started coming, curious then helpful. Kids brought empty jars and dreams. Others brought basil seeds and stories. And little by little the space became something more than dirt. It became something alive. They called it the Central Route. Luchia made a chalkboard schedule. Dylan rewired the outdoor lights. Together they hung up a banner that said, "Things don't have to be perfect to matter." It wasn't a business, it wasn't a plan, it was a beginning. One afternoon, Luchia found Dylan sitting in the middle of the garden, surrounded by potted herbs and second-hand paint cans. He was scribbling something on a napkin. "What are you doing?" "Writing a contract," he said without looking up. "What kind of contract?" "Immoral clauses, terms, conditions." He handed it to her. It said, "Clause 1. I won't run when things get hard. Clause 2. I'll take out the compost before you have to ask. Clause 3. I'll remind you you are enough, even when you forget." Luchia stared at it, her throat tight. "This isn't a real contract." "Sure it is," he said, standing. "Just one that protects the things that actually matter." The next morning, a foundation executive came by. Well-dressed, smiley, two-eyed, offering funding for the Central Route. All they wanted in return? "Let us tell your story," she said. "The billionaire who disappeared, the waitress who saved him. It's beautiful. It'll go viral." Luchia glanced at Dylan. He was quiet, but his jaw tightened. The woman smiled brighter. "It's inspirational, the kind of thing people eat up." Luchia looked down at the contract napkin still in her pocket. Then she stood. "We're not a brand," she said gently. "We're not here to be consumed. We're here to grow something." The woman blinked, taken aback. "Is that a no?" "It's a yes," Luchia said, voice soft. "To our terms. Or pace. Or version." That night, Dylan found her painting the garden sign again. He slid beside her on the bench, their shoulders barely touching. "You were brave today," he said. "Really, I don't feel brave." "Neither did I when I walked away from Navaro Tech, but sometimes the bravest thing is saying no to what looks like everything." They sat in silence, fireflies blinking in the hedges. Then Luchia pulled out a pen. "Clause 4, she said, writing it on the bottom of the napkin. "Protect what's real, even if no one claps for it." Dylan smiled. And under a string of backyard lights and the hum of a quiet future, they sealed the contract, not with a kiss, but with presence.
Chapter 7. The Proposal. The dress wasn't hers. The heels were borrowed. The makeup was done by a friend from the garden center who usually painted murals, not faces. But as Luchia stood behind the red velvet curtain backstage at Fund Cultura Viva, none of that mattered. Because Dylan was out there. And he had that look. The one he got before saying something that would tip her world sideways. She tried to act calm as she adjusted his collar one last time. "This event isn't about us," she warned. "It's about the project. Be charming, be quiet, no surprises." Dylan gave her a crooked smile. The one she loved. The one that usually meant trouble. "Low-key," he promised. "Like a documentary about tulips." "I mean it," she said. "No dramatic speeches, no big moments. We're just here to thank the volunteers and leave." Of course. He kissed her forehead, which was not part of the plan. The ceremony began with the usual: names, grants, polite clapping. The director of the foundation spoke in soft accolades. Everyone in the room had a mission, a pitch, a photo-ready purpose. Then the MC called out their names. "We now invite the founders of the Central Root Project, Luchia Mendoza and Dylan Navaro." Applause. Luchia's legs froze. Dylan extended his hand like a man who'd been waiting his entire life to take that walk. Ready? Not even close. But she went anyway. The spotlight was warmer than she expected. The podium too tall. The room suddenly very real. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words vanished. And then Dylan stepped forward. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady. "We're here because of a garden. But this story didn't start with soil." The audience chuckled politely. "It started with a wedding invite, a stranger, and a lie we both believed long enough to become something true." But his heart alone stopped. He was going off script. "Luchia Mendoza is the reason I'm standing here. Not because she planted tomatoes with me, or painted benches, or talked a neighborhood into believing in itself again. But because she looked at a man with no name and no past, and didn't ask for either." The audience quieted. Luchia couldn't move. Before her, I was running. From the press, from the company I lost, from the man I used to be, but with her, I stopped. Because love doesn't always come after the healing, sometimes it is the healing. He turned to her then, and dropped to one knee. Gasps. Cameras. The world narrowing into a ring box, with 2 wooden bands, carved from the trees of their first volunteer project. "Luchia Mendoza," he said, voice quieter now, "would you give me more than your laughter, your loyalty, your stubbornness? Would you give me your yes?" Luchia blinked. The moment was perfect. Too perfect. The kind of perfect that felt like pressure. 100 eyes. Flashes. Expectations. She looked at him, at the man who had undone her, softened her, made her believe again. And she whispered the only truth she had. "I'm sorry." Dan turned and walked off stage. Outside, the night air burned cold against her chest. She pulled off her heels, walking barefoot on the marble steps behind the building, breath shallow, heart pounding. She didn't stop until she found a wall to lean against. And then she crumbled, not from fear, but from the weight of what she almost said. That night, Dylan didn't call, didn't text, didn't knock on Aunt Rose's door. Instead, she received one message. "I won't ask for answers, I just want you to know. I'd still choose you, even without certainty." She cried, for the first time since the headlines, since the lie that became love, since the day she took a stranger to a wedding just to spite a man who never deserved her, and found someone who did. Chapter 8. The Return. Luchia did not this time, but she did retreat. For weeks after the proposal, she stayed away from the garden center, let Aunt Rosa cover her community sessions, and turned down every media request that came knocking. "She's not hiding," Aunt Rosa would say from the porch. "She's just thinking in peace, something the world doesn't do enough." Luchia needed silence. She needed to remember who she was without applause or cameras or rings. And Dylan respected that. He didn't show up with flowers or messages or grand gestures. He just stayed. In the garden, with the kids, with the dirt and the paint and the sound of laughter growing wild again. Luchia watched him from the kitchen window sometimes. Watched the way he taught Bea how to tie tomato vines to bamboo stakes. The way he let little Mateo convince him that worms could be pets. The way he still wore the apron with the paint-stained "Property of Luchia" logo on the pocket, like it meant something permanent. And every time she looked, she felt a little less angry, a little more afraid, a little more ready. On a Saturday morning that smelled like fresh soil and cornbread, she walked back into the garden without warning. No announcement, just presence. Children shouted her name. Aunt Rosa hugged her with tomato-stained gloves. And Dylan? He didn't speak. He just looked at her and smiled, gently, gratefully, like she had never left. "Hey," she said. "Hey," he answered. They stood in silence for a few beats. And then he said it, the thing she hadn't been able to say herself. "You need a time." She nodded. "And you stayed." "Always." They didn't talk about the proposal that day, or the stage, or the silence that followed. Instead, they pulled weeds together, painted signs, passed out juice boxes and peanut butter sandwiches. And somewhere between the splinters and the laughter, they found each other again. Not perfectly, but honestly. Later that evening, after the kids had gone and the garden hummed with the warmth of sunset, Luchia sat beside Dylan on the crooked bench beneath the string lights. "I ran," she said quietly. "I know. And you stayed. Again. I couldn't leave. Not from this." "Why?" Dylan looked at her, and for the first time there was no hesitation in his voice. "Because I didn't propose to be a spectacle. I proposed because I love you. Even if the answer is not now. Even if it's never." Luchia exhaled slowly. "It's not never," she said. He looked up, startled. But it's not yes either. Not yet." She smiled softly, eyes shimmering. "For now, I just want this. You, me, the garden, the kids. No rush, no headlines, just life." Dylan nodded. "That sounds like the best contract I've ever signed." They leaned in, forehead to forehead. And under those tangled lights, without a crowd or applause or vows, they renewed something more sacred than any ceremony. Presence. Choice. A second chance. Written not in ink, but in shared breath and quiet grace. Chapter 9. The Jacket and the Sun. Luchia hadn't told Dylan everything. Not yet. There were still corners of her life she kept guarded, even after the stage. Even after the silence, even after the soft return. But there came a moment, small, ordinary, when the truth slipped out like sunlight through a half-closed curtain. It happened on a Tuesday when Dylan stopped by her apartment to fix the leaky kitchen faucet. He always did that, showed up with tools and jokes, always careful not to ask why she hadn't invited him in sooner. Luchia handed him a towel and turned to boil water for tea. That's when he heard it. The door creaked open, backpack hitting the floor, sneakers thudding across wood. A child's voice calling, "Mom?" Dylan turned, and there he was. A boy, tall for his age, same fire-colored eyes as Luchia, hair slightly curled, face smudged with playground dirt. He froze when he saw Dylan. Lucia's hands trembled at the kettle. "Secret," she said softly. "This is Dylan." "You didn't tell me you had a boyfriend," the boy said, eyeing him with quiet suspicion. Luchia crouched beside him. "He's not my boyfriend. He's something else. He's helping at the garden. Does he know about the carrot bed I dug too deep?" "Does now," Dylan said, kneeling. "And between us, I once built a worm farm in a city planter box." Sigrid blinked, then slowly grinned. Cool. The conversation took off from there. Robotics. Compost. Whether Jupiter could host life if it had trees. Luchia stood back, stunned. Her son never warmed up that fast. Not to anyone. Later that night, when Secret was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Lucia handed Dylan a box. Black, sleek, tied with twine. "What's this?" "A thank you and a memory." He opened it. Inside, a navy wool jacket, tailored, sharp, but with a corduroy collar, just like the one she first gave him on the night of the wedding. Dylan didn't speak, he just ran his fingers along the fabric. "It's not from a fancy store," she said. "It's from my coffee can savings, 15 years of waitress tips. For Secret's future. You spent it on me." "No," she said. "I spent it on the version of you who never asked me to." The next day, Dylan surprised her. He showed up at the garden wearing the jacket, and behind him, Secret, holding a rolled-up blueprint. "We have an idea," the boy said. "We want to build a mobile book cart." Lucia raised an eyebrow. "A reading wagon, for the kids who can't make it here. We'll call it the Biblio route." Dylan smiled. He came up with it in the car. "I just drive." She knelt beside her son, brushing hair from his forehead. "You like him," she whispered. "Yeah," Secret said, already pulling out markers. "He listens." Lucia looked at Dylan. He was kneeling in the dirt, letting kids explain structural support with sticks and mud. He didn't shine. He didn't perform. He just showed up. Every day. And somehow that mattered more than a stage ever could. That night, back on the porch, Lucia turned to him. "You never asked about Secret. Why?" "Because you never offered." "Does it change anything?" "Only one thing." "What's that?" Dylan looked at her. "Now I know why you're even stronger than I thought." Alicia reached into her pocket and pulled out the wrinkled napkin, their original emotional contract, now worn at the edges. "I want to add a clause." "Go ahead." She wrote with a Sharpie, crooked but clear. Clause 5. "Never love the idea of me more than the whole, messy, real version." Dylan nodded. "Signed," he said, and kissed the corner of the paper. Lucia smiled, small, steady. "Then I guess we're almost ready." "For what?" "For the part that comes after the happy ending." Chapter 10. The wedding no one expected. No red carpet. No diamond rings. No orchestra music swelling in the background. Just a cracked courtyard swept clean by volunteers. A line of folding chairs borrowed from the rec center. Handmade garlands strung between tomato trellises. And a cake baked by 3 grandmothers who argued over the frosting. Lucia never pictured it this way. But now, standing at the edge of the garden in a linen dress sewn by Aunt Rosa's cousin in exchange for painting classes, she couldn't imagine it any other way. "You sure about this?" she asked Secret, who was adjusting the crooked tie around his t-shirt. "He's not perfect," her son replied, "but he's not fake either." Lucia smirked. "Good enough for me." Dylan waited near the archway, wearing the jacket she gave him, the one with the corduroy collar, soft at the seams now from real life. He was nervous, but not because of the ceremony. He was nervous because this time, there were no backup plans, no fake names, no lies to stand behind. Just truth. And a woman who walked toward him holding not a bouquet but a folded napkin, their contract tucked into her pocket. Aunt Rosa officiated. She wore sunglasses and cowboy boots and read from a handwritten speech on the back of a grocery list. "These two started with a lie," she said, "but they kept showing up after the truth came out. And that's love, far as I'm concerned." The crowd, neighbors, friends, dozens of kids from the garden, cheered. Lucia and Dylan didn't recite traditional vows. Instead, they read from their contract. One line at a time. Clause 1, "I won't run when things get hard." Clause 2, "I'll take out the compost without being asked." Clause 3, "I'll remind you you're enough." Laughter, sniffling. Clause 4, "Protect what's real, even if no one claps for it." Clause 5, "Never love the idea of me more than the whole, messy, real version." Lucia looked at Dylan, eyes full but clear. Clause 6, she said, pulling a pen from her hair. "Make this last, not by trying harder, but by staying softer." Dylan added one of his own. Clause 7, "If we fall apart, we fix it. Not fast, not perfectly, but together." They signed it on the back of a garden flyer and kissed with the smell of basil and kids giggling behind them. The party was pure chaos. Homemade lemonade, mismatched plates, secret doing magic tricks with bottle caps. Someone set off 2 sparklers in broad daylight. Luchia sat on the porch steps, dress wrinkled, barefoot, smiling like a woman who'd stopped pretending what her life should have been and had started living what it was. Dylan came and sat beside her, handing her a half-eaten cupcake. "You think we'll last?" he asked. "I think we've already lasted longer than we were supposed to. And if it gets hard, we reread the contract. And if we forget what we wrote?" Luchia took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Then we write a new one, love with clauses." The wedding didn't trend online. No photographers, no viral edits. No one called it a fairy tale. And that was the point. Because some love stories aren't built for audiences. They're built for returning. Built for small moments, like coffee in chipped mugs, mismatched socks on cold floors, grocery lists written in shared handwriting. Luchia and Dylan's story didn't end at the altar. It began again, the morning after, when she found his jacket slung over the chair, her name written on a sticky note on the fridge. Clause 8. Keep showing up, even on the days we forget how. They didn't have a mansion. They had a 2-bedroom apartment with a squeaky porch swing and a fridge that rattled when it hummed. They didn't throw elaborate dinner parties. They cooked pancakes in silence, burned toast on Sundays, danced in their socks when the rain hit the window just right. And somehow it was enough. North and enough. Secret went on to win a science fair for inventing a smart garden system using scrap wires and cardboard. Dylan built a mentorship network for kids like him, bright minds lost in the noise. Luchia taught community writing workshops where women told the stories they were once told not to speak. The central route became more than a garden. It became a place where people planted their pasts and watched them bloom into something new. So, if you're sitting somewhere tonight, wondering if love can come after shame, after silence, after the lie, after the headlines, maybe this is your proof. Love doesn't always come when we're ready. It comes when we're real. And sometimes it shows up in a jacket with a corduroy collar, offering you nothing but truth. Have you ever loved someone with clauses? Not a perfect love, but a real one? Share your story below. Not for likes. Just because the world needs reminders that quiet love, honest love, love with soft edges still exists. And if you've ever chosen to stay, even when it was hard, even when no one clapped, then this story was always yours. Thank you for watching. Stay soft, stay real, and keep writing your own version of forever.